Welcome to History Africa. Here we focus on rejuvenating African narrative by excavating pre-literal times and correlating integrated contemporary African history. Today we will be talking about dating system in history and why it is used. Whenever you study history texts and see things like BC, AD, CE, BCE, they have their uses and meaning in history, and whenever you see an alphabet added to a number or a year in bracket, it has its unique function. And in this video we will explain why such scenarios are seen. History is partitioned for easy understanding. Timeline. There are timelines for different aspects, including timeline of natural history, timeline of the evolutionary history of life, timeline of life, timeline of human development, timeline of ancient history, timeline of the Middle Age, timeline of modern history, timeline of church history, and so on. What timeline actually means is just like having a way of explaining history in a more partitioned and simpler way. For instance, in explaining an individual life, it can be divided into birth, growth, death, just for easy understanding, or it can be divided into early age, middle age, adulthood, or late age, whatsoever way. So timelines are just a method used in giving simple explanation or a way of tracking patterns of an event. Before talking about any aspect of dating system, I think it is important we understand the history of dating system. The inventor of BC dating system was Dionysius Exiguus, a Scythian monk who lived in Italy. Scythia was the ancient name for the area of southern Russia around the Black Sea. We do not know when Dionysius was born. Dionysius was active in the year 500 and died sometime after 525. Using the historic evidence at his disposal, Dionysius worked out that Christ must have been born 753 after the city of Rome had been founded. So he called this year 1, or the year AD 1, the first year Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord after Christ was born. Everything before that was BC, before Christ. Now for you to understand this better is to say that at the year 753, Dionysius divided or created a timeline. Everything before that year became the era before Christ, and everything after that year became the era after Christ. It is important to note here that Dionysius dating system is what we are currently using, but Dionysius dating system was not the first and was not the only dating system that ever existed. Some historians argue that Christ was born several years earlier than Dionysius thought, between 4 and 7 years earlier. Remember in our previous video when we were trying to explain certain basics in history, we said that we usually experience disparity in dates, and which is a common phenomenon in history. This is part of such scenario. Some historians believed that Dionysius was wrong in his dating. Some said it was 4 years earlier, others said it was about 7 years earlier. However, since Dionysius' date became the accepted one, it means that we today use this dating system. In some cases, some historians stated that Christ was born in about 4 BC, which does not mean that Christ was born 4 years before his birth. It merely means he was born 4 years before Dionysius thought he was born. Let's go back to the most common acronyms found in history. The first is BC, which means before Christ. We have AD, meaning Anno Domini, a Latin word for in the year of our Lord.
We have CE, known as Common Era, and BCE, known as Before Common Era.
It is important to know that the term CE and BCE were only recently introduced into history to replace BC and AD. The reason is not all historians believe in the person of Christ, so they chose to replace the name Christ in their usage when using Dionysius dating system. Therefore, BCE is still the same as BC, while CE is still the same as AD. They can be used interchangeably. Let's quickly dive into their usage most appropriately. Whenever BC is added to a year, for instance having 31 BC, it means that thing happened 31 years before the birth of Christ. The bigger a BC number, the further it is from us, and the smaller a BC number, the closer it is to us. On the other hand, the smaller an AD number, the farther it is from us, the bigger an AD number, the closer it is to us. For instance, 1100 is farther from us compared to 1901. This therefore implies that the smaller the number in AD, the farther it is from us, the larger the number, the closer it is to us, which is a reverse between AD and BC. It is important to also note that in most cases in history, we don't usually bother to add the alphabet AD, especially in contemporary history. That is because all year after the birth of Christ is referred to as modern era, and any year or any date that does not carry an alphabet automatically is categorized to be an AD. But BC is always added to any year which comes before Christ. That is mandatory. Another important feature of this time system is the division of the years into centuries. A century is 100 years. In our previous video, we said these are common terminologies used in history. This is used in classifying time.
We have decade. Decade is a period of 10 years.
For instance, saying a person has lived for 2 decades is saying the person has lived for 20 years. That is 10 plus 10. It's like a categorizing method which is used to simplify calling ambiguous dates, or like a code in history used to give explanation to certain situations or classify them, especially in a situation where a precise date cannot be gotten. So in a situation where you hear a historian or where you read in a text stating 1st century AD, we mean the first 100 years after Christ's birth, that is from the year AD 1 to the year AD 100. The same thing applied to AD 2, AD 3, etc. But in the case of AD 3, you are saying the second 200 years after the birth of Christ. That was what I meant by saying it's more like a code or a method of classifying years to make it simpler. Understanding dating system has been difficult to some people because the number of the century is always 1 greater than the number of the years which it contains. So if you want to know which century a year is in, we simply add 1 to the first number of the year. But when we get to the years that have 4 figures instead of 3, we have to add 1 to the first 2 numbers to find out the century. There is one exception to this rule, and that is where a year ends with 2 zeros. For example, the Kingdom of Ghana was established in 300 AD, but the year 300 was not in the 4th century. It was the last year of the 3rd century. Let me try as much as I can to make this simple. You know, when you're counting numbers, when you start from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there you get to 99 and 100, that becomes 1 century. For you to get to the next century, you need to start counting from 101, 102, 103 till you get to 199 to 200. Therefore, from 1 to 100 is the 1st century. Remember, we said century is 100 years. So for us to get to the next century, we need to start counting from 101 till 200. So from 1 to 100 is the 1st century, and if I want to refer you to the 2nd century, the 2nd century begins from 101 to 200. That is why we usually add 1 to the first number of every 3 numbers to understand what century it is. When, for instance, I write 205, what I'm saying is the 3rd century. That is not the 2nd century. Remember, the 2nd century starts from 101 to 200. So the 3rd century will begin from 201 till 300. So always remember to add 1 to every 3 numbers. You add 1 to the first number of every 3 numbers to understand what century it is. And if this numbers is within 4 figures, for instance, if you're having 1923, you add 1 to the first 2 number, which is 19, making it to become the 20th century. To explain this in a more practical term, the Kingdom of Ghana was established in 300 AD. Guess what century is that? That is actually not the 4th century. That is the last year of the 3rd century. It is also important to note that any year ending in 20 is the last year of the same century. as the number which the year begins with. So the year 500 is not the 6th century, rather it is the last year of the 5th century. The year 1900 is the last year of the 19th century. With this, you will realize that the year 2000, which we refer to as the year 2000, is not the 21st century as you may have been taught or as you perhaps have believed for a very long time. The year 2000 is the last year of the 20th century. Therefore, the year 2000 is not the new millennium but 2001. Remember, a millennium is a period of 1000 years. Decades, 10 years, centuries, 100 years, millennium, 1000 years. So we came into a new millennium in the year 2001. Usually there are cases where you see dates in bracket. Date used in bracket after a person's name is used to show when a person was born and when he died. For instance, Usman Dan Fodio, who launched a successful jihad in the western part of Africa, was born in 1764 and he died in 1817. Usually see in some cases name in bracket with hyphen attached to it to show when the person was born and when the person died. So the first segment usually shows when the person was born. The second segment is when the person died. In a situation where date in bracket is attached to the name of a kingdom, empire or event, it indicates when the kingdom or empire is established and when it collapsed. For example, the Benin Empire. You can see this in bracket 1240 till 1897. The first aspect, which is 1214, shows us when the empire was born, and the last aspect is showing us when the empire collapsed. So 1240 is the 13th century. Remember how we said you add 1 to the first two numbers of every 4 numbers. This showed that the empire was founded in 1240 and ended its reign in 1897. Now you will notice that there is a way I pronounce date. Dates are not just pronounced anyhow in history. Also, date in brackets are attached to a text or textbook to show the period the writer is reviewing or trying to narrate. This is a common scenario in most history textbooks. This is because the study of history, if not confined within a stipulated period of time, can easily confuse the reader. For instance, or in most cases when you pick history texts, you see dates placed in bracket indicating the period of the study and the period after the study. This does not mean other years before the study may not be found in the text. What it means that the writer is trying to confine himself within a stipulated year for better understanding. In conclusion, it is important to understand dating system because it helps us understand the attitude behind an action. Time influences lifestyle and behavior. Also, dating system unveils timeline and both human and technological progress of a people at a period of time. Thank you for being part of today's study. Do well to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell for more updates from us, and hit the like button if you liked the video. Feel free to make further contributions in the comment sections or ask questions where you don't seem to understand. This is History Africa.